Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Mason. You know who he is. If you don't, please welcome to Planet Earth. I love learning from you. Steve, welcome back to MythVision, man. You are something else, I tell you, brother.
Well, you're very kind. Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. It's been a while, man.
It's been a while. Look, you've got several books. I highly recommend people check it out. Josephus in the New Testament, and it did not pull me to your page. Oh, here's your page. We're going to go to all books. We're going to see this wonderful stencil of you, and then here we go. Orientation to the History of Roman Judea, A History of the Jewish War, Flavius Josephus and Flavian Rome. Several books, Josephus, Judea, and which is the latest, greatest?
Well, the latest, I don't know about the greatest. The latest is that one you just passed by, Jews and Christians in the Roman World.
Got it.
But the others, if you keep going down, the latest one, I can't, the reason I'm hesitating here is I edit these red-covered commentaries. I write them, some of them, and then other colleagues write some of them, and I edit the whole series. The latest one is 2024, and it's really good. It's by Professor Daniel Schwartz of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And he translated and did a commentary on Josephus' Antiquities 18 to 20. And Antiquities 18 to 20 is where a ton of good stuff that interests your audience
the Jesus
is. It's like the passage on Jesus, the passage on John the Baptist, the passage on Jesus' brother James, all the stuff on Pontius Pilate. All of that is in that volume by Danny. So, that's the latest.
I'll put the links in the description. You should own a copy of every one of his books. But seriously, I love learning this stuff. And if there is someone that we would want to be able to go to for Jesus, Josephus would be like a very good example of a source we would want to go to try and find out about the Jesus movement or Jesus at all. And recently, Schmidt he wrote a wonderful book, that got a lot of attention. Some think it's not so wonderful. Some go all the way into thinking that there's a lot of dishonesty in it. In my circles, some think it was a wonderful book that actually kind of tries to help us get behind the veil and say, hey, this guy was in the know. Josephus would have known some of the high priests who would have engaged this movement in the 30s and would have likely been part of the condemnation of the character that we know as Jesus or the historical person. If we can get behind some of these walls that we have, right? I wanted to discuss Schmidt's work with you first, if you don't mind, pros and cons. Because I had a scholar, I laughed when I heard him say it, and you might chuckle too. He completely disagrees with it being neutral-ish negative. Right. He thinks it is a confession. He says, by the time you're done reading what they have there right now in the text of Josephus, you are a Christian. He made the joke. He says, if you read that passage in the Testimonium Flavianum, by the end of it, you have now become an actual bona fide Christian. What are your thoughts, Steve?
Well, how much time we got for this? I think the main thing is I've just finished, writing a long review of the book, so it's kind of fresh in my mind. But it's very important. I don't know if your audience knows what's in the book, actually, like how it's structured. So should I just quickly summarize? Please. So it's in two parts. The first part, which is by far the longer part, I think 50-60% longer than the second, is really going over what a lot of people already think, which is why this is authentic Josephus, for the most part, with a couple of small adjustments that Schmidt proposes. And he's not original with the small adjustments either, really. But he wants to shore up this first part. Josephus wrote this. How does he do that? Well, he goes through, for example, phrase by phrase. He's not the first one to do this, but he does it. goes through phrase by phrase and says, look, this is distinctive vocabulary in many cases of Josephus. And not only of Josephus, but of Antiquities. And not only of Antiquities, but of Antiquities 17 to 19, which has a distinctive within Josephus' corpus. He's imitating Thucydides, and he uses a lot of strange vocabulary. So, for example, the phrase, they accepted with pleasure, that's in this passage, that turns up 8 times, but only in Antiquities 17 to 19. So it's like, so his first point is it fits. It's at home in the language of Josephus and really nowhere else.
So the safe way, you can walk through this because lay people are watching with me like I am. Yeah. Then if a fabricator did insert that, they were immersed in knowing I need to imitate the language of Josephus himself, modeling his style even. Same language, same style in that passage.
Yeah, that's right. And then as a historian, you have the testing of hypotheses. How plausible is it that a forger would be so clever to find things that we discover only with electronic tools? We track down all these things, and that he would have a motivation first and the skill to detect all this stuff and then input it. Yeah, it's possible, but history doesn't like extravagant hypotheses.
Right. What's more probable that
what's the
Josephus just had this, or that was original type of material to the section?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and the thing is also as a method issue, the onus is always on the person who wants to argue that it's not authentic. It's not like it's up for grabs. It's not like for every single passage in Josephus' 30 volumes, we have no idea whether it's authentic or not. We don't start the prologue of Antiquities and say, I wonder if he wrote this or, Joe Schmo wrote it. No, it's in the text, right? So the onus is always on the person who wants to say it doesn't belong there. I want to argue that, Joe Schmo wrote it instead.
Gotcha. Makes sense.
They could be wrong, these positions, but they are part of historical method, whether we like it or not. So,
Okay.
So that's what Schmidt does in the first part of the book. He goes through that, and he also does more sophisticated stuff. So he, for example, looks at what are called stylometric indicators. And these are looking for an author's unconscious uses of language. So how do you use, like all of us have our way of speaking and writing, right? The way I just said, right? Or I might say in Canada, these are just habits of speech that you don't even think about, right? They just come out. Well, it's the same thing when you're writing, the way you use small particles, or the way we would use punctuation, for example. These are generally reflective of the way somebody writes when they're not even thinking about it. So even laying aside the clever forger idea, you can use these stylometric or forensic kinds of tests to see whether this is authentic. Now, it's a bit dicey. It's not perfect, but it's another way, a confirmatory way. So he does that as well. So the main point is the first 2/3 of the book almost are really trying to establish that Josephus wrote this thing, but at the same time, introducing the possibility that some of his language isn't as flattering of Jesus as people have taken it. As you said, quoting someone else, that you're basically a Christian if you can write this stuff. He's saying he finds a bunch of phrases that he finds much more ambiguous, that a Christian wouldn't necessarily write. A Christian would be more forthcoming. So we can get into some of those later, but because I think this is a problem with the book, but he does that. Second part of the book is much briefer, and this is the part that carries all the heavy lifting, the heavy load. These are the weight-bearing pillars of the book, and this is what makes his book distinctive. And in this part, he says, okay, One of those phrases that we just discussed, that is authentic Josephus, says that the leading men among us, in Greek, if any viewers have some Greek, paremen, among us, the leading men among us, or our leading guys, condemned him and then handed him off to Pilate for crucifixion. Now, according to Schmidt, he does an analysis of every one of those 52 examples of this phrase, paremen in Josephus. And he contends that in every case, or virtually every case, it signifies direct personal knowledge. So it's like a code that Josephus uses to signify his direct knowledge of the people that he's talking about. And so that's what kind of gives him the leverage to, in the second part of the book, the longest second part chapter is like vetting candidates for being his informant about Jesus. Right?
So rather than
go ahead.
Rather than, and feel free to fill in the gaps too, is like, rather than saying, where did Josephus learn about this Jesus character and the Pontius Pilate material and all this kind of stuff? A lot of scholars have wondered, from what I've read, and correct me, you know this better, but I'm just speaking to the audience here. Did he have access to archives that he just doesn't mention his sources? Does he have some kind of knowledge based on him being, the emperor's sidekick, to be able to just look in the annals and say, hey, okay, hold on, we know this, we know this, and that's where he's getting his information. Is it hearsay? And some have speculated he's hearing from other Christians who are telling him this, which is why it looks this way. And but then it sounds to me like Schmidt is saying Caiaphas was his buddy, and he knew Caiaphas, and Caiaphas saw him that day, and Jesus said to Caiaphas, "You will see the Son of Man." He's making it so close. Yeah. It makes red flags to more cautious skeptics and stuff in my arena that are hold on, man, this sounds like apologetics, to them.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts? Am I right on that, or?
Yeah, he's getting very specific, and that's the distinctive trait of his book. That's the whole thing right there in a nutshell. So there are 6 main chapters. The first 4 are trying to really, secure the perimeter around authenticity. A, Josephus wrote it, and B, but his language wasn't what Christians would have written. His language is more ambiguous, and that's why
wiggle room, right? That's the wiggle room to say this is an interpolation from Christians. This is authentic Josephus. Yeah. Okay,
precisely, and that's why he says Christians never, even when they cited the Testimonium in their later works after Eusebius, from Eusebius onward, they didn't make anything of it. He says because they didn't read it as the way that modern scholars do, as glorifying Jesus. They read it as, okay, this is kind of a neutral statement. It's not, nothing to see here, really. So they didn't say, Josephus proves he was considered the Messiah or something like that. They don't ever. So that's in
clever
chapters
argument from silence, right? A clever argument from silence in a sense.
I wouldn't. Yeah, I mean, the problem is there is silence among these Christian authors. So the question is how you explain it, right? So one explanation is, well, the testimony wasn't there in their text. That's why they didn't make anything of it. And he's arguing, no, it was there, but the version of it that was there didn't strike them as worth using. They already had their faith and their belief in Christ, so it didn't add anything. It was just they couldn't use it because it wasn't a strong enough statement by an outsider. So that's in chapters 1 to 4. Chapter 5 is briefer than 6, and it scouts a general terrain of people Josephus might have known, or even landscapes he might have known. He is sent up to Galilee at the end of the year 66. And according to Schmidt, he spends 2 or 3 years bombing around Galilee, visiting Jesus' old haunts. And he likely bumped into people who knew Jesus a generation earlier. This is a problem, by the way, but that's what he says. And he says Josephus became a Pharisee, then he became an Essene, and the Pharisees and Essenes both would have known about Jesus, and he was like in tight with them, so he would have heard stuff about Jesus from them. So that's chapter 5. It's all this kind of vague, could have been, might have been, should have been, people who knew something about Jesus, and when he's visiting Galilee, probably heard something, but it's kind of vague. Chapter 6, the longer one, is where he drills down and does what you're saying. And he examines, especially comes up with Ananus II, who was the high priest in the year 62 for about 3 months. And Josephus clearly knew him. The problem is Ananus died in early winter or spring of 68. So this is a problem that he doesn't really deal with. But he targets him as his most likely informant of all these informants, because he says he would have been present at the trial because he was Ananus II, son of a high priest, Annas I, who, according to the Gospel of John, was he was former high priest when Jesus was executed, but he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas. So these guys were tight, and the son, Ananus II, they should all have been celebrating Passover together. This is a big part of his book, because Passover laws require that families get together and eat the lamb, in one sitting.
It's a clever thought, process.
Yeah. It's kind of attorney-like, I would say, like lawyer-like kind of. If this is true, then this is true, and if that's true, then this is true. Right. And you're moving directly towards a kind of very strong conclusion. So if you accept all the stops along the way, then it sounds pretty credible. And I think that's why the book is making very big waves, actually. I mean, I can't even tell you, some people are not scholars, whom I just happen to know as friends, have written to me recently and said, hey, have you seen this new book by Tom Schmidt? And there's no reason in the world why they would have read an academic book, because it's not their thing. But that's how much impact the book is having. And many people are saying it's forced them to rethink, the value of this little 3 sentences in Josephus. I can't follow along there. But,
I was going to say, because I want to follow. This is not a personal thing. This is a scholarly endeavor. And, when you wrote your books, you got scathing reviews and you got compliments. It's just how it works. As an academic, I want to know why you're not convinced and what are the major problems. We kind of hinted at them. Like, if you can accept that this is neutral language and not totally Christian, okay, that's one hurdle, right? Once you've accepted his neutral language and that hurdle, now we can explain the next step. And then it's like one thing after like a domino kind of thing. Because once you strip that, him knowing Ananias, even if Ananias knew Caiaphas, knew Jesus, all of that is irrelevant ultimately on the passage itself linguistically and all these things. So there's all these different things that, I imagine you would be like, okay, here's a problem. So if I were to ask Dr. Steve Mason about Dr. Tom Schmidt, and I say, Dr. Mason, what is wrong in your opinion with the hypothesis he's presenting? What are the major problems that you cannot accept or do not find convincing?
Yeah, let me stress at the beginning, before I list them, that I've corresponded with Tom, and he seems a perfectly nice guy. Very nice. I say that, and open also. Yeah. So I already indicated some of my concerns to him privately, and he talked about, okay, when I do a second edition, I'm really going to have to think about these things and change some of the things I said. So I say that because our social media, especially nowadays, is so polarized. and you want to see these people are evil and those people are corrupt and they're trying to do bad things, and I'm on the side of the angels. I'm righteous, of course. I think we need to get rid of all that. I mean, that's incompatible with doing history. History is just a search for what happened, right?
I'm glad you did this, because I know, for example, of Richard Carrier, right? He came to my house not long ago. We did recordings in person. He wrote a pretty scathing, I guess you'd say like a scathing blog about Schmidt, and it's pretty damning. I mean, it's really like he's just an apologist. He's lying. He's making up stuff, and he's like, so, I haven't read that. I just know from what people told me, and it does create more division. I'm not asking for that. I'm asking for simply, this doesn't work for me. This doesn't work for me. Here's why. And this is not to knock Schmidt as a thinker, as a scholar, as a person. I interviewed him. Very kind guy. We had a blast. And I was like, even my mind was going, well, hold on. That is, if he did know this guy and this guy's related to this guy, like I'm doing all that in my head. I'm like, hold on, what? So
he seems a great guy. I'd be happy to have a beer with him. So here are the things, and I'll try to put them in order of importance for me, because there's like 20 things I could mention that are problems, but some of them are relatively small. Right. So here are the biggest problems that I see. First of all, what does it mean? What are we trying to do when we interpret a text? Like, what does it mean? So there are certain questions that I would immediately ask of Josephus that he simply doesn't ask. But it seems to me these determine, or they at least shape, your understanding of this text. So, for example, he focuses, like most scholars do, this is not unique to him by any means, on the inner space of these three sentences. So, as we already discussed, he goes through each phrase in these three sentences and says, okay, is that Josephus or not? What he never asks is, all right, but these are three sentences in a much, much bigger text. So there's this kind of Christian obsession with anything to do with Christianity that is just pulled out of Josephus, and we just look at it separately, right, by itself. But he didn't write it separately. He wrote it as part of a story for his audiences. So if we're asking about what he means by it, and whether he might have been negative or positive, whatever, the only way you could possibly address this is by looking at the whole context. So that's the literary context, like the text of Antiquities 18, right? That's one issue. Second, and this is even more basic, what's going on in Josephus' life? Why is he writing this work? Well, that's not addressed either. And the thing is, he's in Rome. So if you ask yourself the question, in Rome, in the 90s, where Josephus is writing this book, the 90s see under Domitian, in the Flavian period, is there a view of Christians? Do they already have a prior impression of Christians? The answer is yes, they do, because already in 64 CE, when Josephus happened to be in Rome, he was visiting Rome then, before he moved there in 71, he was visiting Rome when the Great Fire occurred in 64 CE, and Nero was emperor, and Nero, according to Tacitus, punished the Christians for this, and in a very crude and cruel and really horrible way. He put them up on crosses and then put tar all over them and used them as torches, and just an awful way. So, I mean, this is a big deal, right? Everybody in Rome would know about this. Tacitus later mentions it. Also, Suetonius says that Nero punished the Christians. He just says they were a shameful kind of superstition that had crept into Rome. Tacitus also says that, a harmful superstition. Tacitus complains that the Eastern world is kind of dumping all its stuff into Rome, right, the world capital, including these Christians. But he says, the public was sympathetic to them because they realized this was a very cruel way of dealing with them, but they are kind of creepy people. So that's what Tacitus says. And then we have Pliny the Younger, who is sent to a province of what is now Turkey, and he writes to the Emperor Trajan saying, I know these people, these Christians, are bad news, but I don't know whether I should execute them just because they're Christians or because they've been caught doing some criminal kind of stuff. So what we know this for sure, is that in Rome, the Christians were in what you might say is a bad odor, right? They are viewed as being bad news. Pliny thinks they might be eating babies or having sordid sexual misdeeds with each other, men and women all together, because he's surprised when he actually tortures some Christians to find out, some slaves who are Christians, to find out, okay, now tell me the truth. What do you really do when you get together? And they say, we don't do anything. We just have a nice meal together and, sing some hymns and stuff. And Pliny says, well, I'm coming up empty here. I don't know what all this bad stuff is that they do. So my point is, we know stuff about how Romans were viewing Christians when Josephus was there. And Tacitus says this plague came from Judea, right? Now we look at Josephus. Josephus has arrived in Rome. He's been there 20 years already. He's established a very strong following as the expert in Judea and Judean matters, right? And he says this everywhere. Yeah, I'm the guy. Nobody else could do. He actually says, literally, nobody else could do what I've done. I'm amazing. that's what he says at the end of Antiquities. And he stresses, I'm the guy to go to for Judea. Right from the beginning of his war, he says this. So he says there's lots of nonsense being written about Judea, and I am going to tell you the truth because I know what I'm talking about. Nobody else does. So if we put these things together and say, okay, Josephus is in Rome, and he's hearing all this stuff about Christians, and people say they are a disease that's come from Judea, and Josephus is saying, wait a minute, look, I know what I'm talking about here. Let me tell you about these Christians. Well, they're named for a guy who actually, was pretty amazing. He went around doing amazing stuff, wondrous works, and teaching things that people thought, hey, these are home truths, quite good. But, our top guys didn't want him around, so they got rid of him, handed him off to Pilate. He was crucified. But his followers didn't give up. Why? Well, in part, he appeared to them alive again after he was dead. So they stuck with him. And even until now, still, and he's amazed, right? In 93, they're still found. So these are your Christians. Those people you're all so worried about, and you think they're doing criminal stuff. No, they're not so bad. They're gullible, they're naive, they're superstitious, yes, but they're not harmful. They're not criminals, right? They're just following this dude who was crucified, right? So in my view, there's a very simple explanation of why Josephus includes this story. But what nobody cares about, I've never seen anybody really care about it, who writes, and including Tom, who writes about these three sentences. What comes next? Well, this is only a little bridge into, then Josephus jumps off into other things that happened among Judeans in Rome. And he tells them at much greater length. He says that 4 of our guys did some really nasty stuff. They defrauded a woman who was attracted to our Judean laws. And remember that Josephus has spent more than the first half of Antiquities celebrating the Judean laws, saying they're the finest, highest laws ever. They reflect the laws of nature. So it's not unnatural that this woman, wife of a senator, would be enamored of Judean laws. And he says, yeah, that's a good thing. But some of our guys came from Judea and defrauded her because they took advantage of her being a proselyte, somebody coming over to our laws. And they postured as being experts in our laws. They weren't. They were actually kicked out of Judea for being criminals. So these are con artists, but they defrauded this woman. And this was back in 19 CE, and this got the Emperor Tiberius all riled up because this is a senator's wife, So he expelled the Judeans from Rome way back then. So if you simply read all this together and put it all together with Josephus's situation in Rome, you have to make coherent sense of it. I think it's not so difficult to do that. He's saying, number one, these Christians that you're all worried about, don't worry about them. They're just a bunch of superstitious people who follow this guy. They're sort of off-piste. They're not normal Judeans. They've attached themselves to this one guy. And you can understand why he was doing wondrous things and teaching good stuff. But they don't represent us. But they're not harmful. These other guys, now there's an example of people who are really harmful, because in his Antiquities, he spends the first half celebrating Judean laws, saying how great they are, spends much of the second half showing the decline of people following the laws until the destruction of Jerusalem that happened in 70. So he's telling a story of what led up to the destruction of Jerusalem, right? So the book ends on the eve of destruction. And he's saying all these things went wrong. Even high priests were not following the laws anymore, like Ananus II, who executed Jesus' brother James. He did so completely illegally. And this is a monstrous thing he did. And all the reasonable people in Jerusalem knew it was a travesty. It was wrong. Right. So anyway, what I'm saying is simply, and now I'll just summarize, Tom doesn't even ask these questions, right? He's like laser focused on the internal content of these three sentences exclusively. And I think if you do that, you're not interpreting Josephus, right? You're not asking even why did he write this or what's going on. And so
especially if you're trying to make a case that is trying to actually maintain that most of that material, 99% of it, is authentic. If you're going to do that, I think that's an important thing when you're writing a book, that you go, listen, I don't need to give why did this person interpolate? Because then now you have a different problem that you have to address. Yeah. But his whole goal is to try and practically say it's almost all authentic. And if you're doing that, then what did Josephus mean? Because you that should be like one of the primary things you should be focused on, especially if you're saying, nope, these words are his, nope, these words are his, I'm making a case these are all his words. Okay, then we get these are his words. Let's just grant it. Now, what does the context tell us, like you're describing? And I think that is an important critique.
Yeah, well, exactly, because that changes the equation, right, of whether you think this is positive, negative, or whatever. In my view, this is all a hang-up that Christian or people aware of Christianity bring to the table. But we forget that Romans, Josephus' audience in the 90s, didn't know anything really about Christianity. They certainly had no idea that it would become the state religion and the worldwide religion later. So we're looking back through that lens, right? And so we're asking, well, was he a Christian? Or who wrote this was a Christian? It sounds very positive. But if we just think of Josephus' situation, he could be perfectly positive. He has no problem with people working wonders, like Judeans working wonders. He tells other stories about, guys exorcising demons and things like that in Book 8 of the Antiquities. He talks about Saul visiting the medium of Endor and having conversation with Samuel, whom she calls up from the dead. So even the appearance of people after death is not a strange thing. So when he says, he appeared to them alive again, we get all kind of jittery about that and say, oh, so he believes in resurrection. Why? that's Christian theology. No, he's just like saying what, he doesn't have a big problem with this. He's perfectly aware that amazing things happen. God does amazing things, or there are uncanny things that happen in the world, spirits, he's got no problem with all that stuff because he's an ancient guy. He's not one of us. Right.
Right.
So it does change your calculation, your calculus. If you say, yeah, he's just writing like, yeah, don't worry about these people. They're a bit nuts, but okay.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a different thing. But the second problem then in the scale of bigger to lesser problems. So I think that's the first problem. It's just he doesn't ask about Josephus, like Josephus' life or context or what he could mean, except within the confines of this little passage. Second, once he goes to all this effort to prove that A, Josephus wrote it, and B, he got it from somebody like Ananias II, he doesn't join the rest of the dots. And there's one big gap here, which is, well, there are two big gaps. One is, what did those people tell him? Like what? Because if this is Josephus' version, okay, you say, all right, Tom, you've convinced me that every single word of this is Josephus's distinctive vocabulary, right?
Just grant it. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's stipulate that. All right. Now tell me, what did Ananias II write that that influenced Josephus to write it this way in his language? And the problem here is that I think that he's making the Testimonium do double duty. He's treating it as Josephus's composition very clearly, right? It's distinctive Josephus language. And he's using it as if it's also what Ananias or somebody told Josephus.
That's a hard part for me. And maybe this is anachronistic because I'm looking at Jewish tradition as well. And from what I understand through Celsus and others, which I'm triangulating here, a bit speculative, but Jews were not fond of he rose from the dead, and even internal data may suggest in the Gospels that there were Jewish traditions already implying, no, that he didn't rise, or that they stole the body, these kinds of things. So you would imagine that even the internal, I'm speculating here, and that's all you can do. It's all we can, that's what sucks. I wish we could find a hidden lost text that told us something, or a hidden rock inscription or something. But like, the question I have is, would Ananias or would Caiaphas or any of these guys ever go, he seems to have rose from the dead according to them? Or would he have said, likely been told by one of these guys, they believe it, but we know this is a fabrication, or this is fabulous, or it's fiction, or something like that? You see what I'm saying?
I do. And that's also a good question. Like, what would such a person have said? My concern is even more basic than that. And it's just at the level of method. That is, okay, you're saying two things. You're saying Josephus wrote the version we have. We can read it. We can see it's his language. Okay. But that means that he got a different version, because it's not possible. It's simply not possible that Ananias II wrote in Josephus's language on a napkin or something and passed it to him at one dinner. And it happened to be exactly Josephus's distinctive language from Antiquities 17 to 19. That's not possible, right? It's just not possible. So here we're not speculating. That's my point. We're not actually coulda, woulda, shoulda, might have. We're actually talking about historical method or philological method here, which assumes that two people do not write exactly the same way. I mean, we use this principle to detect plagiarism in student essays. When you see two essays that say exactly the same thing, something's wrong here, because two human beings do not write in the same word order, the same, choose the same vocabulary. It doesn't happen ever, right?
If I understand you correctly, and maybe I'm jumping the gun here, but that what we have is Josephus granting, again, like we said, we've already supposed the language. We're going with Schmidt's point here. Yeah. It's Josephus. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But he leaps. He does something that you in the historically would go as a historical method. This is a bad leap. He leaps to go. He got this information from Ananias II, or is it the second or third?
Ananias II. Yeah.
Ananias II. So he gets this from Ananias II. Well, what did he get? We cannot say what he got. If he did get, we have no idea what he got. And that's why I brought in what I brought in, only jumping the gun and kind of triangulating and going, would Ananias II, would Caiaphas, his relative, would they have honestly thought, he rose from dead, he did wondrous deeds, or was he a troublemaker to them? Right. I mean, according to the story, they're not fans of this guy. So
given that Ananias executed Jesus' brother, right? He probably didn't care for the family all that much. Yes.
Right. I'm picking up what you put down. And by the way, I'm going to grab my Josephus here real quick, just so I have it. I pulled it out the other day, and I thought about you too. I was looking up sources in Josephus about Alexander the Great, Gog and Magog, and the building of the Iron Gates and stuff from the Scythians and all that. Here it is. Yeah. You know what? I don't want to waste too much time here trying to find it. I was going to pull it out because I was going to maybe read from the sections before and after, but oh well. We're having a conversation here. I'm having fun here. I'm having fun.
Not to worry about it. So just to reiterate, I don't even need to go there just to make this simple point. Here, let me give you an illustration. When he describes John the Baptist later in Antiquities 18, and most people think this is an authentic Josephus passage because it's not Christian. He never doesn't mention Jesus, doesn't make John the herald of Jesus, nothing. It doesn't seem to know about any connection. So that's not Christian. But here's what he does. He says that John the Baptist taught piety towards God and justice towards one's fellow human beings. Right? That's how he summarizes John's teaching. Mm-hmm. Now, that language is classically Josephine. That's his thematic language. If you look earlier in Antiquities, that's how he judges the kings of Israel. Did they practice piety towards God and justice towards one's fellows? Right? It's distinctive of Josephus. It's his way of encapsulating all your moral responsibility. Right? If you are you honor God and you treat your fellow human beings decently and properly, that's it. He may take that from a passage in the Bible in Micah 6:8 that says, this is what God requires of you. Practice justice and walk humbly before God. So he may be reformulating that in his own way, but he formulates it in a typically Greek way, right? Justice towards your fellows and piety, eusebia, toward God. In fact, the Essenes, when he describes them, he says the first two oaths that they take are to practice justice toward their fellow human beings and piety towards God. So we know this is Josephus's way of writing. Now, if you ask in that passage, but he got his information about John from someplace. How possible is it that somebody told him that John practiced or taught piety towards God and justice towards fellows? It's zero possibility. This is Josephus' language. But what that passage highlights is that his sources may have told him any number of things about John. We have no idea. But he put it through his grinder, his language grinder, and said, this is what John taught. I'm telling you, trust me, this is what John taught. Would John himself have recognized this? Maybe not. Maybe John taught, hey, the world is ending right now and you need to get immersed and, whatever, in water to avoid immersion in fire. Maybe he just taught a nice ethical, treat other people well. But this is Josephus's packaging. And we see all the way through Antiquities as he redoes the Bible, paraphrases the Bible, he constantly puts it into his own language terms, right? So these are just illustrations of my basic point here about the passage on Jesus. This is Josephus's language. It's his way, and then Schmidt has proved it, I think, more or less.
So you're convinced that he's that he's likely correct.
Yeah, I'm mostly convinced because I didn't publish it, but I'd also done this for my own use,
Right.
Partly because people keep inviting me to talk about the passage. So I thought I'd better have an idea. So like 8 or 10 years ago, I went through it phrase by phrase and also comparing other ancient Greek authors to see how much, difference in latitude there was. And many things turned out to be distinctively Josephine and distinctive of Antiquities 17 to 19, very much as Tom has laid out. So I don't have a big problem with that.
Right.
But then what do you do with that? And for me, that suits the idea that I was trying to suggest before, that simply he's the expert in matters Judean, and he's telling his Roman audience, hey, they follow this guy. Yeah, he did some amazing stuff. And so they followed him, but our top guys got rid of him. But that raises a third unasked question in the book. And here's where I think there's a significant problem. So Tom is saying, I'll call him Tom rather than Schmidt, presumed friendliness. We haven't met in person, but I think I can get away with Tom. He's making a big deal of what Josephus knows from eyewitness direct evidence, right? That's like central to his argument. But what's missing in the testimony? What's missing in this passage? There's a big gap in the middle, and it's a crucial gap. So Josephus says he did amazing stuff. He's a doer of marvelous works, and he taught stuff that everybody recognized as truth, But then our guys got rid of him. Okay, so what's missing is why? Like the charge sheet. What were the charges against Jesus in his trial? He must have been charged with something. But how weird is it that Josephus has this alleged, eyewitness testimony, and the most important part of it is missing?
Do you think, if
what
I
are
may,
the charges?
I was going to ask you, do you think there's some missing material from this passage in Josephus yourself? I mean, what are your thoughts? Do you think there might be something missing?
Well, I think but Alice Whaley already made a very impressive study a long time ago, 15 years ago, I don't know, with her book on the Testimonium. And she traces it in a very detailed way, a very expert way, through from antiquity through to the 20th century. She shows how the debates arose in the Protestant Reformation, Protestant scholars doubting it, and that's really interesting too, right? Even Christian scholars doubting that this is authentic. But she goes through all this stuff, and she argues, and Schmidt agrees with her, Tom agrees with her on this point, that a very small adjustment probably is needed. That is to say, Josephus wrote not he was Christ or he was Messiah or whatever, but he was known as. He was called. He was thought to be. This was his nickname. In Greek, it's a very simple word. The word he uses when he talks about James later. He says he's the brother of the Jesus known as or called legomenos, Christ. Right. So it's a very easy, simple word, and that's his normal way of indicating a nickname. There was this guy who was like Jacob, known as the gazelle or something, or Eleazar, known as X, Y, Z. That's his normal way of writing. So it's perfectly plausible that that's what he said about Jesus, and simply in the transmission process, that qualification dropped out because it's there, again, when he talks about James. later.
Right.
And it's in later Christian authors like Jerome. He was believed to be, or he was called, something like that, turns up in much, much later Christian versions of this. So Alice argued already long ago that simple explanation is that dropped out, rather than stuff being added, like rather than the testimony being added to Josephus.
Like
rather,
the Eusebius hypothesis or something.
Yeah, exactly. Rather than an interpolation hypothesis, it's actually simpler to explain all the evidence. Like, where did these later qualifications come from in Christian authors? Simplest explanation is that's what Josephus wrote. He was thought to be or believed to be, this, and that just dropped out.
Interesting. So, okay, you got me thinking about this rap sheet of why they would have killed him, and Josephus doesn't mention that. So I'm wondering if that drops, or obviously that's not as easy to prove that it drops when you have a simple, way of explaining called versus he is the Christ.
I think there's a very simple explanation of that, or simple potential explanation of it.
Okay.
And it's this. He's writing in Rome, and everybody in Rome knows that the good die young. Right? That people who are truthful, who speak truth to power, as we would say, philosophers, their lives are not safe. So under Nero, he just executed a lot of people. Anybody he considered potentially troublesome, even if they'd done nothing wrong. He was just paranoid. And so he had people executed, senators, powerful senators, people who were perfectly virtuous according to Roman, virtues, like admirable guys who served in the military.
Know this, though. You're saying Josephus knows the person of Pontius Pilate. Does he indicate this? Like he knows a bit about?
No, I think he doesn't indicate it, but he does later, for example, say about John the Baptist very clearly. He says, he just attracted a big following for teaching good stuff. Right? John taught only good stuff. And then Herod Antipas said, okay, got to get rid of him. Why? Well, the charge sheet is not a very nice one. It's just that I'm bothered by you. You bother me because you have too big a following, and people trust you and like you, and this really annoys the hell out of me.
Yeah.
So you're kind of a competitor to me, so you're gone, and I want you out of the way. But so what I'm saying is, Josephus is a man of the world, right? And he knows that this is how things go. That good guys, including philosophers and people who teach truth, their days are numbered very often, especially in Rome recently, and also under Domitian. When he's writing under Domitian, philosophers are being expelled or killed, or Domitian gets all paranoid at the end of his regime. It seems, just like Nero did in 64, 65, 66. So what I'm suggesting is that he doesn't need to make a rap sheet. He doesn't need to pass it on, because he's already just said this guy is really popular. He taught great stuff. He was truthful. He did amazing things. And, top guys want to get rid of him. C'est la vie. Tant pis, as they say in French. It's like, too bad. It's, this is how things go in life, that the powerful want to get rid of people who are, threatening their positions in some way or seem. So it seems to me that this makes sense in the context of Josephus' life. It doesn't make good sense of Tom's analysis doesn't explain this. Why, if you've got such a bead on an eyewitness account from the very trial, that evening or nighttime in the high priest's house.
Yeah.
Well, he stresses that it agrees with the Gospels. Right. Yeah, no, but the Gospels give an elaborate account of why the high priest wants him dead. Namely, he claims to be Messiah. He even depending on the version in the Gospels, claims some connection with God, which the Gospels treat as blasphemy, but that's in Jewish law. That's not what blasphemy is. Like claiming to be a Messiah is not a crime,
right?
In Jewish law, but saying the divine name, which I'm not going to say here. But YHWH is how we usually write it. You're not supposed to say this name in Second Temple Judea,
right,
and that's blasphemy. That's considered blasphemy. And if somebody does that, I don't know if you saw The Life of Brian, but they have a scene where they're
stoning it. Yeah, that's such a good movie.
They're all repeating the name, right?
Yeah.
But this is it. So the judges are all supposed to stand up, according to the Mishnah tractate Sanhedrin. They're supposed to stand up and rip their clothes and say, as if they're in mourning because someone has said the divine name that should not be said, right? It's too sacred. That's what blasphemy is. But in the Gospels, it's like, you say I'm Messiah. Oh, what need of more witnesses do we have? He's claiming to be Messiah. He needs to be killed. So anyhow, so Tom says this all agrees with the Gospels, what's in Josephus. Yeah, but not really. The big gap is like, how do you get from being a great guy, teaching good stuff and doing amazing things, to being executed? Mm-hmm. He never fills in that blank there, which an eyewitness, presumably, that would be kind of important for an eyewitness to say he was killed for this reason. And that's the big missing link, as it were.
Yeah, so technically, another way of putting it in simple terms is, if his information was eyewitness from the night that happened, from the people that were present, there's no way Josephus, with that kind of insight, would not have added the rap sheet or some kind of information that said, hey, check this out. So here's what happened. Here's why. And then a brief sentence addition as to why they put him to death, and then move on. But it kind of derails. I don't want to take you off of your critiques here of what Schmidt's work is presented.
Hey, it's your dime, man.
But hey, I wanted to bring this up because, you've famously shown really good, I think, and pretty confidently that Acts is using Josephus. And, he gets things chronologically little things, and there's reasons why, right? Your book goes into this. Some scholars who not only capitalize on what you've said and said, hey, this guy's on the money, they think there's, in a sense, and this is obviously more speculative, but they say, granting Steve's right, like we've granted earlier, for sake of argument. You could dispute other things, I'm sure. You could try to wrestle with Tom's stuff and not get any further. No. Let's not do that. Let's just grant you're right about Josephus being used by Acts. Okay. Yeah. The camel's nose is under the tent. Where's the rest of the camel is what some of these scholars might suggest. So you've proven with the strongest bits of evidence that you can show that it knows Acts. Acts knows Josephus. With that in mind, some of them speculate that what if there was a potentially more damning piece of literature there in the Testimonium, or more material that we just don't have. And Acts is engaging with this because Acts constantly is trying to show the Christians are innocent and Jews are the problem, right? Let's blame the Jewish. Clearly has an anti-Semitic kind of slant in Acts, Luke Acts.
I wouldn't say anti-Semitic, but
anti-Jewish. Anti-Jewish.
Yeah, anti-Semitic is more of a racial term, which is it's a modern German thing from the 19th century. Yeah,
anti-Jewish slant, and obviously pro-Christian. And hey, Theophilus, we want you and the aristocrats and others to recognize we aren't the problem. We never were troublemakers, even though we have been accused of this. Yeah. Who's accusing who and under what? And they're constantly in court. They're constantly dealing with having these legalities and all this kind of stuff in Acts. Why? So some of these scholars think that maybe there is some reason that Acts might be engaging with a negative perspective that Josephus might have about the Christian movement with its chief, Jesus, being a possible troublemaker. And one of the accusations, I talk to Dennis McDonald right now, and he's playing with this. Dr. Dennis R. McDonald, he's the guy with the Homeric stuff, right? He likes
his work,
Yeah. Great guy. Was just at my house, and he's like, he loves your work. And he said, look, I wonder, there's an accusation about Paul and them stirring up riots, potentially causing a problem, right, in the temple. Yeah. We get this constant episode in the Gospels. It constantly mentions there's a problem here. Now, I know that we can be critical of that as well, like how massive temple, you don't think the soldiers would have killed him on the spot, all this, all these speculations, and in either direction, it's speculative. But the accusation that they're troublemakers in the Gospels and in Acts seems to be present, and they wonder if there was something more damning that Josephus had here that they're reacting to. So it's like an indirect communication of, like, if we read Acts as a mirror of something that might have existed before Josephus. Because I'll give you one problem, and I want to have you give me your opinion and like speculate with us here. But like, if the language you say is what Tom Schmidt is saying is pretty much mostly there, apart from he is the Christ, but was called the Christ. If that's all
was the Christ. And this is actually, I mention it because that's a tell.
Please.
Like a Christian would say, he is the Christ.
Right.
And not he was.
Right.
But that's a good tell that something's dropped out there. So he was known as would make sense. But a Christian wouldn't say he was the Christ, like in the past. So,
Gotcha.
So to interrupt you, it's an important point.
I'm glad you did. No. That's an interesting point, because I'm wanting to poke a little holes here in this idea, and that is, okay, that's pretty damn close to. I can't imagine a Christian would not have saw that as favorable to mention. Even if Josephus said he was the Christ or was known as the Christ, he's given so much credibility to the fact that the guy was doing miracles, was doing this. I mean, if we grant what's there was his language, no Christian takes the time to make mention of this important historical figure when he practically lays out the gospel minus the fact that Josephus isn't a believer. I mean, that I can't imagine an educated Christian scholar would not see that and go, I've got to make reference of this. I mean, this is so practically laying it out, other than he was known as the Christ or was thought to be. If that's all, I personally would be like, okay, my name's Clement, and I'm Irenaeus. I'm like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's all speculative on my part too, but I'm saying, like, I don't know why they wouldn't mention that at all, unless they just didn't know about it. But you see my struggle here, right? Like,
I do. Two problems. One is that we are, again, laser focused on this little wee passage, which, in my view, is not even really worth talking about. In a sense, I mean, I'm talking to you because you're my friend, and I enjoy talking to you, and I hope I might throw some light on something in a useful way. But actually, this little paragraph changes nothing in our understanding of Roman Judea, or of Josephus, or of Christian origins. It's a complete distraction, in my view. However you slice it, whatever you think is authentic, inauthentic, who cares? It's because I think I'm trying to say there are lots of ways to understand it, as authentic, as not authentic, whatever. I don't think it matters. So that's what I mean by that is, if you make this argument, this stuff is gold, right? For a Christian, is what, like, you're
Tom
saying.
Schmidt is kind of, in a sense, he's kind of making it out to be that, though. In a modern context, to say historically, look, we've got a.
Well, he's kind of saying it's fool's gold, right? Like, he's saying that that's why Christians didn't cite it, because they understood the language to be standoffish or quasi-negative or neutral, he says. Like the phrases like, for example, a certain Jesus. He says that's kind of, that's kind of pushing Jesus away a bit. Nobody would say a certain Jesus. That's what he says, the Greek word tis. Or he says the opening phrase, along comes a certain Jesus, along comes, or now comes. He says this can carry a negative connotation, and he cites, some examples. So for his jam is to say that, yeah, Josephus wrote it, but the way Josephus phrased it didn't make Christians very comfortable, so that's why they wouldn't use it. Now, my point to you is, if you say, no, but the way I read this and the way this other person you mentioned, if you could agree to what Josephus wrote, you're already a Christian. Like this is basically the Christian creed. What I'm saying to you is, if you use that criterion, there's a bunch of stuff in Josephus. Like if we stop just focusing on this little paragraph, there's all kinds of stuff in Josephus that a Christian could make hay from. Gotcha. And we know that because they did. Because Eusebius, in his church history in the 4th century, quotes Josephus all over the place. He had big chunks of quotation. And says 2 things. He wasn't a Christian, so this is like really good information because you can't accuse him of Christian bias, right? He's an independent historian. But look at what he says, like with Maria eating her infant child, like this was like the lowest of the low. This is what Jerusalem fell to. And, they were miserable and God was punishing them. Eusebius says, yeah, right on, preach it, brother. This is gold. But what he says is Josephus didn't really understand the reasons. So he gave all this kind of Jewish stuff as the reason why this was happening. The truth, of course, is this was happening because they crucified Christ 40 years before. That's why. So what I'm saying to you is, from a Christian perspective, almost everything in Josephus is gold.
Gotcha.
So to say that, if I were a Christian, I would love to quote this little passage here, and it's amazing that they don't. I think that argument isn't very strong because we know for sure. Michael Hardwick wrote a book many years ago, like 89. It's called like the patristic use of Josephus, something along that line, the church fathers who used Josephus. Right. And he's showing that, from the middle of the 2nd century, Christian authors are using Josephus. And they know Josephus works, but they don't even do what Eusebius will do. They don't cite the war. They don't cite all the punishment of the Jews. They just don't. They're focused on the Against Apion, which is like this 2-volume essay by Josephus on the antiquity of the Judeans. And they're kind of, that's all they really, because they find it valuable. Like
against the pagans, right? Because they're engaging a Gentile world. Yeah, okay.
Exactly. They find it valuable for apologetics. Right?
Yeah, so there's like in Justin Martyr, for example, for those who don't know, he has a debate partner who, well, in Justin Martyr's, it's a Jewish guy, it seems, but he's also trying to appease the if I could use the term pagan, you know what I mean? I don't mean pejorative. But like they think this guy might be a fictional character that he's actually debating to prove it to the Gentile world. Like, and that's what's happening with Appian. That's interesting. I just thought to myself, if there was a place they would mention, Jesus gets named here. I mean, and I know that that's like, doesn't prove anything. I would think it would just maybe add a little more value to go, well,
I'm not sure it does. I think that this is our modern perspective. So
gotcha.
If you're looking for attestations, just pure attestations, like did Jesus live, for example, the whole, the mythicist kind of argument. Yeah, maybe. Okay. But that wasn't a concern to them, to these Christians. They already knew what they believed. So to have somebody do like a second-rate version of what they believed doesn't really help them. They already know why they believe and what they believe.
So they didn't need this reference, is the point.
They didn't need it, I think, yeah. They didn't, and especially if it was in an attenuated form, like he was thought to be Christ.
Play a hypothetical with me for 1 second before we get to Acts again, because I'd like to get your thoughts on this, because I like the way you push back every time I bring something in. When you do so, it makes me think, okay, that's actually a good point. Let's say it wasn't a debate between Gentiles and Christians and Jews, as we saw why they would use Appian. Let's say there was a real early mythicist debate. Okay, then you might catch them go, look, even Josephus, and then they'd start quoting him if there were other people who doubted his existence. At least you would think, hypothetically, that would be a good go-to text. Yeah.
The problem that brings up the other methodological issue that I was thinking about, and this is quite important. If you, there are two ways to come at this, so let me come at it one way and then maybe come at it the other way. Simple is good. Simpler is better. The more, in logic, as everybody knows, the more conditions that you attach to an argument that have to be met for the argument to be compelling, the more conditions. It's like when you roll dice. If you roll 1, the chances of getting a 6 are 1 in 6. If you roll 2, the chances of getting 2 6s are much diminished, because the number of possibilities rises, astronomically. And you add another dice. Every condition you add brings down the probability. So applying this to history, we always want the simplest explanation. It may not be the right one. It's like in medicine. If you go to the doctor with a headache, it may be that you have a brain tumor or you have a rare disease that's causing your headache. But the doctor's probably going to say, well, take 2 aspirin first and try this first, because headaches are extremely common, and the extremely common causes of headaches are known. So deal with those first, and only if you need to advance to a more sophisticated explanation to explain the evidence, then do it. But you only do it if you need to. And here's a problem in our field generally, that people spot parallels, right? And say, okay, this looks like this and this looks like that. So the whole thing about the so-called Flavian hypothesis, right? That the Flavians created, well, that's based on, I saw something here and I saw something there, and I think that's kind of suspicious. Like this, like the anchor with the fish symbol, or something like that, or dolphin around an anchor, or near an anchor, or something. So I think, here's my kind of epiphany, my revelation. I think the Flavians created Christianity. Well, okay, yeah, but the problem is history doesn't work by epiphany, right? It doesn't work by revelation. It works by asking a question, posing a problem, and then saying, all right, what is the evidence that we need to explain first? And what are all the possible explanations that we can think of to explain that evidence? Let's weigh each one and see which one explains the most, the simplest way, right? This is historical method. So when you start to say coulda, woulda, shoulda, why didn't they do this? Because I would think that they would have wanted to do this. Well, we're just in total speculation.
Of course. Right? And the reason I brought that up, though, is that Richard Carrier, who's a mythicist, he's one of the leading mythicists, him and I think Robert Price are the two. Richard Carrier's latest book, called The Obsolete Paradigm of the Historical Jesus. He's calling it that because he's like he thinks just every bit of historical Jesus method, it just falls short in his view, right? He thinks we need to strip this whole quest and like quit acting like we can get it until we have definitive evidence. And of course, he makes his whole hypothesis, and he argues against like brother of the Lord. He argues against the same stuff he's done before, but like dealing with critics. And then he goes even a step further in chapter 8 of his new book. I read it because I reviewed it before we did an interview on this, and in it he goes after Docetism. Okay,
right.
This is a very interesting chapter, but he ultimately thinks that the category of Docetism, like the category of Gnosticism that just becomes a blanket statement, is being misused by scholarship, that not all of these groups are Docetist. There was a real group called Docetist of some sort, but not all of them believed the same thing. He believes there was a category of Christians who believed in a Jesus that they believed was celestial of some form. Yeah. And ultimately, in a nutshell, the reason why I brought this up, and I'll get to the conclusion as to why I even said this, is I wanted to kind of get your take on if Christians were, like if there were mythicist Christians running around who said, nah, the guy didn't really wasn't really on earth getting crucified by Pontius Pilate. If there were real Christians that believed that, you would think more of these, especially what we like to call proto-Orthodox guys, you'd think they'd be attacking those other Christians saying, dude, even Josephus, I mean, like, come on, like we have the guy, they would reference it. Now that was my speculation. Of course it's speculative, but I just say all that to say he makes this case that he thinks that we've miscategorized all of these Christians as Docetist when he thinks some of them were actually mythicist Christians. And then he does, there's a lot of work he does. He goes into the Greek, into this stuff and all this stuff. Maybe you might check it out and tell me your thoughts later on whenever, but that's why I brought that up, is that like, in a mythicist Christian, I'm again speculating, like maybe they didn't care to quote Josephus, but if there was an argument over whether a dude actually walked the earth and actually was killed by crucifixion under Pontius Pilate, that would raise, at least in my mind, some kind of probability that they would just go, dude, Josephus, literally like the expert on Judea, says he was there. He didn't even think he was a Christian, but he said he was there. But this is all in speculation.
So I'm listening to your language, Derek, though, and you say, some kind of probability. So this kind of language is confusing to me. So what does that mean? Some kind of probability that they would do this? I think it's difficult to distinguish that from maybe could have happened.
Right.
The thing is, the basic premise of ancient history is we don't know what happened. All right? We do not know what happened in the ancient world. That's our starting point. If we knew, we wouldn't need history, history is the disciplined investigation of the past. If we already knew what happened, we would not need to investigate at least those things that we knew for sure. But every generation, we realize the things we thought we knew or people thought were pretty secure are, often crumbling and not secure, and they need to be challenged. So in principle, we don't know in the strong sense of the word really much at all about what happened. So we inquire. And then the problem is, like with what you're presenting from Richard Carey, I have nothing against Richard Carey at all. There's no reason for me to take him on in some way. That's not what I do. I'm quite happy to openly investigate the past and look at his arguments. But you need to ask, well, what's the problem? What problem are we investigating? That's where history begins. Because we don't know what happened, history begins with a problem. Say, I want to investigate, like science in this way. I want to investigate this problem, like what effect do these drugs have on this condition or something like that. That's what historians do. Here's my problem. Why did Cestius Gallus, the legate of Syria, why did he undertake an expedition into Jerusalem in the autumn of 66 CE, when he was not prepared for a siege and he hadn't prepared logistics? So why did he do it? So that's a problem. That's a historical problem. And you could come up with various hypotheses. Well, he was incompetent. He was stupid. He didn't understand what was going on. These are all hypotheses. And then you test each one against the evidence we have. And that evidence is mostly in Josephus. right? How do you make sense of Josephus' account?
Yeah.
But there's also other evidence because we know some things about Cestius Gallus outside of Josephus. So it can give us a check on, like, he was a senior guy. He'd been a consul in Rome, and he'd been in military campaigns before. So, and he's around 70 years old. So we know these things that Josephus doesn't tell us, but we need to test our hypotheses against all of the information, right? So this is what a historical...
What's the answer? No, I'm just kidding.
that would take us too far afield. But there's my problem. Sorry?
Oh, I said I get where you're coming from, though.
So the problem is that people throw out all kinds of speculations, and I hear them, right? Mm-hmm. I think this happened and this happened because of this and that, and those people did this and they didn't do that. And okay, fine, I'm listening, but I don't know what investigation is being conducted here. Like, what is the problem you're trying to solve, and what are all the hypotheses you're testing? Or are you just advocating a hypothesis and saying, I think this is what happened?
Yeah, what I just did was completely hypothetical. I was saying that I imagine if Carrier was right, which all of that is assumptions to begin with. Like, suppose there were groups of mythicists running around as Christians, believers, who say the guy never ran the earth. He didn't exist on earth. Yeah. In my mind, I'm simply thinking it would probably make a passage of a guy saying, nah, dude, he died by crucifixion, Yeah. It would,
but why would the same person not cite Tacitus, for example, who says the same thing?
Yeah, I imagine he probably would. How often? I don't know. I don't know how often Christian fathers quoted Tacitus as far early on. You know what I mean? Like, because
not very much. Yeah,
right. Yeah, that's all I was thinking, and I totally appreciate you taking the time to explain that too, because that's the one thing I always remember when you get on here and teach and you're like helping us understand history, like how to approach it. Wow, we may never know, right? We may never figure out any of this material to the oomph. And we have to be cautious, of course. So that, I guess, to pull you back onto the Acts speculation, that could, so we have Josephus, we have Acts. You've shown really good arguments, I think, that have persuaded many. Goodacre, Mark Goodacre's on board. Like, all of these scholars I've talked to are like Steve Mason, totally. Bart Ehrman's not convinced. And I talked to Goodacre, right, who's a colleague of his, and Goodacre goes, I don't know how Bart's not convinced. I'm convinced. And like, so I'm convinced too after reading it. But there is a leap, if you will. It's an assumption. Again, this reverse engineering this idea that, hey, if the camel's nose creeped under the tent, is there anything we can maybe look in Acts to think it's in dialogue potentially with what's going on with Josephus? And there's assumptions there, and that they were causing riots or causing trouble. You kind of wonder, is there something that Josephus had? Because people love to go to that Testimonium and wonder if there's like missing material, and like it was really more condemning because the passage before he's talking about things that are going on with Pontius Pilate, and then after that Testimonium he's like, and now here's another revolt that happens, and they're like, or something to this effect, and they're wondering if like there might have been a little more chaos surrounding Jesus initially. I don't know. And you're the guy to ask, so that's why I figure.
Yeah, it's just a simple matter for me of method. So there's all kinds of stuff that could have happened, might have happened, might be the case. But what do we need to explain the evidence most simply? And in that case, Acts, clearly, I agree with you that Acts is one of the major themes of Acts is sort of the innocence and harmlessness of the early Christians. And that accords with, I think, what Josephus is saying, basically.
Right.
There's no big problem here. They just followed a guy. Now, his is more implicitly pejorative. That is to say, most Judeans don't follow this guy. So I have already laid out to you that we have the best laws ever. that are from the cradle to the grave. They are the laws of nature. They are supreme. That's what we Judeans do. These Christians, well, they're kind of, like I said, off-piste, right? They just follow this guy. And so he also attracted many Greeks, because you don't need to be a Judean to buy into his truth teaching. He's an amazing guy. So I think Josephus is already implying that they're not harmful. What you Romans worry about them for that's not who they are. They're just a little strange. They're superstitious. From the point of view of Acts, of course, that's not it. I mean, the author of Acts is talking about the resurrection of Jesus as changing everything. And that's who the Christians are. But he still kind of agrees with Josephus. We're not harmful. The really harmful people are like the Judeans who killed Christ, according to Acts 2 and 4, right? They bear the responsibility. They did it by the hands of Pilate, but, they really did it. That's going on there. But I don't see that you need to invoke Josephus to make sense of that.
Gotcha. Okay.
So if we're following the simplest hypothesis and not introducing working parts that are doubtful, then I don't see the need for that hypothesis.
And that simplest hypothesis is starting with the fact that what Josephus has written is not so positive. It is, but it isn't. It's not like it's pro-Christian, like, hi, I'm a Christian. But it's not absolutely tarring the guy. So we start with what is there is practically what Josephus wrote, simplest hypothesis, and then roll over to Acts. We there's no need to postulate, well, Josephus had and he went into the temple, or there was a riot around Jesus and this is how he died. Like, there's no reason to assume that. It could have been there, like you said, but we go with the simplest, most obvious explanation historically, and we don't need to posit that.
Yeah, maybe not the most obvious one, but the simplest one, in the sense that it explains all the pieces that need explaining, but no more. If you start to introduce other aspects, they may be right, but they're not necessary, right? So it doesn't mean that they're wrong. It just means they're not necessary. They're not needed to explain this. So I think with Acts, really, you want to sit down and look at the themes of Acts and, where's the emphasis and all that. But just to recap on Josephus, I'm suggesting that he was actually kind of thinking, he wasn't a bad guy, this Jesus. He was one of ours, and he did all this amazing stuff. Yeah, other Judeans have done amazing, worked wonders, expelled demons, cured people. That's what we do. The Essenes do that, and they tell the future as well. They have the gift of being able to predict the future. So we have all kinds of great stuff, we Judeans. And this Jesus guy, he was one of ours, and he did, and he taught true stuff. But because of that, somehow the top guys wanted to get rid of him. No more explanation is needed than that. That's what That's what powerful people do. Right.
Okay, so couple things. I hope I don't lose track in my memory here. Remind me on Acts. I'll say the question now, but I want to jump to something else so I don't lose it. Ever since you wrote on Acts, keep this question in your mind. Maybe it'll give you time to think about it. Ever since you wrote on Acts, knowing Josephus, have you? Maybe are there additional things you did not include in there that you think might actually be knowing from Acts, some kind of dialogue or awareness? But your book, since writing that book, you have, what you have in it, the case you've made to show that Acts seems to know Josephus. Is there any more material since then that you might have discovered or think, hey, there might be something to it? All right, put that on the shelf. You get my question. The other question I have is about this Greek Jew and Greek. He drew many Jews and Greeks. Okay, this is an interesting phrase from Josephus, and I kind of wanted to ask you, fundamental question. Identity-wise, who are Greeks? Here is Josephus writing to a Roman audience in Rome, describing these Judean events, and he mentions he drew many Jews and Greeks. I asked, maybe this can help us with the phraseology of Paul when he talks about Jews and Greeks. And I've had people who think that Greeks there, Helen, the Hellenes, that they might actually be apostatized Israelites of some sort or something to this effect. But let's stick with Josephus. If you can help me know who this identity group is better, then maybe we can also say, look, Paul's working with the same Jewish language, a similar kind of category.
Yeah, in short, it's a very vague term, and it can mean everybody in the Eastern Empire. So, for example, he calls the people who live in Caesarea Maritima on the coast, right? Famous Caesarea. He sometimes calls them Greeks. He sometimes calls them Syrians. Same people. Well, they're Syrian by kind of ethnos, by ethnic, origin, because that whole region is Syria. Right. But they speak Greek and they follow Greek customs. Because the problem is that Greek, like Athens, right, the center of Greece, and Sparta, especially Athens, they became a model for the entire Eastern Mediterranean. So when you had a new polis, a city, they would follow in some measure the way that Athens did things. So they would have like Greek entertainment facilities, a stadium, an amphitheater. They would have like an Odeon. They would have a basilica. They would have a court place. They would have an agora or a marketplace, right? These were all Greek kind of institutes. They would have a gymnasium for training their young people, right? Educating them. These are Greek things. And all the cities of the Eastern Mediterranean emulated Athens in introducing all this stuff. Even Jerusalem had at some point a gymnasium and all this stuff, right? So even
the amphitheater, it looks like right under the
exactly. So it's not a specific term, but it can be a specific term. So when Josephus says, for example, in the prologue of War, I am a Judean, I'm writing history, and the reason I'm writing it is you Greeks have lost the plot. You should be writing history because it's your thing. Like you Greeks invented history, historia, as a way of studying the past. I'm doing it as a foreigner, he says. I'm a foreigner, but I'm going to do it better than you because you've forgotten how to do it. And all you care about is money and rhetoric. You don't care about truth anymore. We, Judeans, still care about truth. So I'm going to show you how it's done. I'm going to write a better history than any of you. So in that case, he's really targeting actual Greeks, right? Like people from Greece who are in Rome. And he's saying, you guys are obsessed with all your ancient victories like Marathon and all the old battles with you won against the Persians and all that. Come on, get with it. There's interesting stuff happening now, like the recent war against Rome and Judea. That's what I'm writing about. And I'm going to tell you the truth about that, right? Because you Greeks you've lost the plot, as I said. So it's like an accordion. It's an expanding term. It can refer to everybody who follows Greek culture and speaks Greek in the East. So the Roman Empire is divided, right, between the West and the East, mostly Latin in the West and mostly Greek in the East, right? That's a simple division. And so when Paul says in Romans 1, I've already done the Greek thing. I've been everywhere and I'm headed, in Romans 15 he says that, but he says in Romans 1 that he wants to bring his announcement, Evangelion, to you in the West, having dealt with the Greeks, right? So he's talking about this this basic division in the empire between the Greek East and the barbarian West, right? So he even says there, I'm going to, come to the barbarians in the West as well. because it's not such a term of abuse. It just means like people were not Greeks, right?
Right.
That's an initial sense. So he's using it slightly ironically, maybe, but it's not like a big term of abuse. So anyway, my point is, it's a sliding scale for Greeks. And I don't think we should, like saying they are, whatever you were saying about them, Derek, maybe they are these people who are lapsed this, or I come back to the point that, maybe, but that's not necessary to understand how he's using language here.
Yeah, and that makes me, again, get back to the point of like, when Josephus writes this, what Josephus means by that may actually have some Christian, it's already taken on like a few generations of Christianity where they are now really trying to draw from the East and the West. Whereas if you go back to Matthew and you suppose Q behind, this source that's talking about don't go to anyone but the lost sheep of the house of Israel, don't go to the Samaritans again.
But that's Matthew. That's Matthew. It's not Mark. Mark has Jesus go to Gentiles already.
Right. So that
he's quite big on that. Yeah.
That's all. Well, it's funny when I had Dennis McDonald here, and he's big on the Q. He's got a Q plus Papias hypothesis. He has.
Right.
He's like, he's big into social identity as well, trying to figure out who the social in group, out group, and all that stuff is. And he says, he's like, it's clearly a problem. Matthew doesn't like that about Mark. So he clearly is pulling material from Q, and he thinks Mark knows Q, of course, and he has his own reasoning. So, but at the end of the day, like there's some problem going on when Matthew has to say, don't go to anyone but these people. And then the Great Commission after he dies. But then in Mark, you already have him, which is an earlier gospel, your point. But I just wondered, I'm thinking about this, Jews and Greeks, and Josephus mention, Paul does this, and Paul's earlier, according to most scholars, than the Gospels. So anyway, it's a bit little rabbit trail. If you feel like we've touched on that enough, I think we have. If you're cool with moving to,
I'm happy to leave it. The problem is I'm fascinated by all this stuff, but me, Derek. I mean, we could go on for hours and hours talking about this stuff.
I know,
because we need to get into Paul and Mark and their relationship and all that stuff, which is really endlessly fascinating.
That is actually something I would like to do more in a future episode, if that's okay.
Another time,
So what have you found since you've written your absolute game changer, Axe Nose Josephus book? Because I think that's been a fascinating book. A lot of people love. Is there anything you've learned since, or is there anything you left out that you said, man, because I couldn't make it super solid, knowing you, but I think there's more. I think there might be more in Acts that might know Josephus.
First, to clarify, the book that I think you're referring to, Josephus in the New Testament, that book, I didn't mean to make a big deal of this, actually. It's just that I was asked by Hendrickson to write this book about what's in Josephus or what's in the New Testament, and I felt obligated to give this a new look. So I investigated for myself, and what was different in my approach was everybody had said that Luke and Josephus are drawing on similar sources, right? That was the explanation of their overlaps. But by that time, I'd come to be familiar with Josephus' way of writing, his terminology, his lexicon, his language. And then I thought, well, it doesn't quite make sense, because some of these phrases, specific phrases, are Josephine. And it's like if you visit, Israel, Palestine, and you go to archaeological sites, you'll sometimes see like a wall of stones, rectangular stones. And right in the middle of it, you'll see like a stone that's all dressed up. It's got a design on it. And you say immediately, well, wait a minute, that wasn't designed for this wall. That's a secondary use. It's borrowed from some other wall that it once belonged to, right? Because you can see the designs on it. That's what I was thinking about these passages, is they bear the marks of Josephus's distinctive interest, language, and all that, the Sicarii, the Egyptian the Quirinius and the census and all that stuff, and Judas and Theudas and so many things. These are distinctively Josephine. They're not just what everybody observed, or they're not just basic facts, right? Even calling the Pharisees the most accurate school among this is the Acrobestate Hierasis. This is Josephine language that you don't find anywhere else.
Wow.
Right? So if you see it in Luke Acts, well, you at least have to think either directly or indirectly, he's getting it from Josephus, because that's the font of it. So that's what I wanted to clarify about the original book, which I first wrote in 92 and then revised in 2003. Yeah, so it's like ancient already. I had a chance to go over it all again because I was asked in 2021 to attend a seminar in Belgium in which we rethought some of these issues, and I was asked to revisit this issue. So there I tightened up the argument and said, okay, there are a bunch of things that could be from Josephus in Acts. For example, if you just read Acts and you look at King Agrippa II and Berenice, you would assume that they were married, because they come in as a couple with pomp and ceremony and all this stuff and sit in judgment. Josephus doesn't explain, or Acts doesn't explain, pardon me, what their relation, but they're brother and sister. And Josephus reports the widespread rumor in Rome that they were actually having incestuous relations, right? So if you
Game of Thrones.
Yeah. Well, if you know this, that adds a lot of levels of spice, right, to this, and especially when Josephus says Paul says to Agrippa, I know that you know Judean law and you care about Judean law and you're really a straight up guy. Well, if you know this background, then it becomes very ironic, right? The whole situation. Similarly with Festus, or with Felix, so there's a double trial right before Felix and Festus, and with Felix, the Acts says that Paul started to talk about final judgment and self-control and things like that. And he gets all worried, right? Felix gets all nervous about this. Okay, you can take it just as read in the story, but if you know the story in Josephus, that Felix got the hots for Drusilla, who was, he basically just lusted after her and grabbed her as his wife because he could. Then these things about self-control and final judgment, take on a new dimension. But I left them aside because they're not necessary to explain the text. Whereas the author's use of Josephine vocabulary and distinctively Josephine lexicon, I think, is kind of a slam dunk. That really shows that he was using this stuff. So in answer to your question, yeah, there's all kinds of stuff, I think, that could be in the background that the author of Acts would know and would shape his own story, what he's thinking, but he never conveys it to his audience. He never tells his audience this. So unless they knew Josephus's account as well,
right,
they wouldn't get the irony. So he may be having some private jokes here, tittering away to himself, but he's not expressing this or explaining it. Whereas when he uses Josephus' vocabulary, I think it's very difficult to explain that without saying he knew Josephus. And I have added a couple of things in that more recent deal I did. It's in that book you mentioned, Jews and Romans, in the Jews and Christians in the Roman Empire. There, for example, I made a bigger deal of what Luke does with Lysanias, the tetrarch of Abilene, whom he introduces in chapter 3 of the Gospel of Luke. And so he's saying, when Tiberius was emperor, Pontius Pilate was governor, Annas was the high priest, and Caiaphas, in some strange combination he doesn't explain. So he goes down the list. He's trying to show off his knowledge of who was in power, where. And then he says, and when Lysanias was tetrarching in Abilene, why? Where is Abilene? It's way the heck up in, it's a little thing up in Lebanon.
Right.
And there are all kinds of little rulers he could have mentioned here, but he focuses on this guy who never appears in the text again, right? Unlike all the others he mentions, or Tiberius doesn't appear again, but he's kind of, he sets the scene when Tiberius was emperor. The other people, appear in the text. Well, so why does he mention, Lysanias of Abilene? Well, it turns out that Josephus makes a big deal of him. In the latter part of Antiquities, he mentions him frequently. He already died the century before. So, but he talks about the territory as the tetrarchy of Lysanias in Abilene. So I think, again, the easiest explanation of that is that he knows this from Josephus, and he's just showing off the way that he shows off with Judas, Theudas, the Sicarii. So this is so artificial, when the tribune arrests Paul and says, oh, you're speaking Greek. Like almost everybody around is speaking Greek. And then he gives a little history lesson, like out into the open air. So you're not the Egyptian who led the Sicarii into the desert. Like, why? It's like, imagine a police officer, who speaks, I don't know, Arabic, and you're arrested, and you say something in Arabic like, a good day or whatever. And he says, oh, so you're not. And then he just goes off into outer space. You're not that guy over there who did this and that. And that. Of course I'm not.
Right.
You just arrested me for being right here and now. Like, we don't need this little history lesson of all the people that I'm not. I'm not him, and I'm not another guy, and I'm the guy you arrested.
People have made so much out of that. I don't know if you've seen some of the Lena Einhorn's book. I think she had wrote a book on this. That they found that and went, "Whoa, that's a weird statement," and it is weird. But notice how out of a weird statement, an entire hypothesis that Jesus actually was the Egyptian, or. Right. Right. Or, Paul might have been the Egyptian, and there's so many interesting little speculative, fun little fictions that we've spun on our heads.
But the simplest explanation is this guy is showing off. He shows off from the beginning of Luke. I'm telling you who all the rulers were. I know this stuff. And all the way through Luke, he does it, and all the way through Acts. So he shows off his knowledge of Athenian culture, language, shows off his knowledge of sailing in chapter 27. All these technical terms for sails and ropes and things like that. That's just who this guy is. He's showing you, he's trying to build confidence that he knows.
I know the Christians are good, and there's nothing, he's building.
And I know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah. Historically, I know what I'm talking about. Yeah. There's so much good stuff here. I got you on record here. We're recording. Would you be interested in helping me craft a video that is about this whole thing you put together, this work? Because I'd like to do a well-polished video where I actually show your case in a really fun, enjoyable music, cinematic kind of video.
Which case is that? For Luke, Acts, and Joseph?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, sure. That would be fun, probably.
Well, I'll, really it would just be making sure that I get the data correct, the materials correct. And then, of course, I do all the heavy lifting, editing, that kind of stuff. And then maybe you can help me with that.
I like that idea. Yeah.
You could say, hey, no, change this image to this, or, whatever, at the end. Yeah. Look, that wasn't meant to be on air. I could have asked after. But, Steve, there's so much we can get into. I really, at the end of the day, derailed you off of Tom Schmidt stuff when you were going through many of the various things that you were being, critical of. Seems like you're more critical as let's put the bow on the box here, because we could actually go on, and I would like to do more with you in the near future, if possible, covering other topics. It seems more like, look, I can hold his hand here and sing Kumbaya up to a certain point. Once you have left Josephus and went back to the priests acting like eyewitnesses here, you've literally left the historians' methodology of like what we can be confident on, and you should have said, look, we're moving into a speculative area. Okay, here's my speculation, and just be upfront. I have a strong case of eyewitness stuff. It kind of reminds me of the same problem I've had with Christian apologists, and then I'll let you take this wherever you want. When they go, eyewitnesses, New Testament, eyewitnesses, and I go, really? And then they go, yeah. Even Second Peter says we were eyewitnesses of His Majesty, and I'm like, that's a forged text. That, like, they're saying they saw, but someone is fabricating this. So, like, you don't argue though. You got to deal with Second Peter. Why are you quoting Second Peter? Second Peter, we have all the reasons to see this as later. We have all the reasons to think whoever wrote that is pretending that they were there at the mountain and saw the majesty and all that. And so, that's not looking good, because now it makes me question any other eyewitness claims you want to try and bring up about Christian, the miracles of Jesus and things. And so with this eyewitness claim he's making is a bit speculative, and it can go any direction, it seems.
Well, maybe I can make one, I'll try to make it a very clear, short comment on this. He tries to justify this, as I mentioned at the beginning, by zeroing in on that phrase, among us. And he says he's studied all the cases of that occurring, and it always refers to Josephus' personal knowledge of the men involved or the people involved in this thing. This, I think, is a big, big problem. So I've also looked at all those cases, and I'm really familiar with them because they're all over the place. And they come in like the prologues to Josephus' works. He says repeatedly, among us, this is how we roll. This is how it is with us. Because remember that his whole posture is, I'm the Judean expert, and I'm telling you, Greeks, meaning all the rest of you, how things are in our world. We have the best laws, we have the best, customs, we have the best values, we are more courageous than anybody else. We die for our laws. So he frequently says, among us, this is how it is. This is that phrase, among us, which Tom is taking as direct personal knowledge. But I don't think that works. I simply don't think that works. So his reason is, so he does have a justification for making this claim about, eyewitness evidence. But I think what he's resting on is a mistake. That this phrase, among us, is a much more general phrase. It's not meaning I have personal direct knowledge of this particular thing. He's simply saying, and he says it time and time again, among us. So forgive me, I'll give you an example. In the beginning of his autobiography, when he says, different nations have different criteria for being a super duper status, right?
Right.
With us, among us, it's membership in the priesthood. I am a priest. I'll wait for your applause. This is this is how we roll, right? This is how we value, and that's the phrase he uses. But that's not like a code for any kind of secret knowledge or special knowledge of events. He's just saying, among us Judeans, this is what we value, right? Mm-hmm. And that phrase is what Tom takes to be a specific vehicle of entry into eyewitness knowledge. I think it's a mistake, simply.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for taking the time. That is there's a better justification than the Second Peter example I gave. I just point out that like when people are making false, even though the justification just shows it's a mistake. So when you're making a big mountain out of that one thing, it's like the whole mountain kind of crumbles there. And it's like, hey, he could have, but again, coulda, shoulda, woulda is different than I'm making a scientific or a historical, I'm trying to be precise. I want to be accurate about what I can try to make a case for. And I'm really glad you took us through this and kind of explained some of this. And I'm sure there's much more. Is there somewhere where people can read your review?
Well, I was asked to do this review article, so it's not a normal short review. It's an article length review for a journal called the Irish Theological Quarterly. So it should come out fairly soon, after 2 or 3 months in that journal. Okay. We'll see about whether they will allow me to, because I think the Irish Theological Quarterly probably has a fairly small readership. So I'll ask them whether I can make it more generally available. But, journals are sometimes protective of stuff they asked you to do. If they want to keep it as their proprietary thing. I wouldn't blame them.
If they do, give me a link to their journal and I'll put it in the description for people.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for asking. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I'd like to read it myself, and I'm sure many people wouldn't have a problem, even if they are highly protective of what you produced. Many people would find a way to access that somehow through them. So yeah.
So thanks for asking. Yeah.
Absolutely. Look, Steve Mason, ladies and gentlemen, the legend himself. If there's anybody, and I'm not saying this to get your applause or to hear, I'm not playing games. Nobody I've ever interviewed is methodical like you are. Okay. That is not to say that they're not methodical in their work. I'm just saying on interviews. Okay. Yeah. You are very, very, very well at explaining and taking your time telling me how wrong I am about everything. I'm just kidding. No, but seriously, Steve.
Thank you.
Yeah, you really, I've had a lot of compliments over the years when we've done our long 4-hour live streams. We really, really would go, we would take it to a whole different level. And I learned so much, and I continue to learn so much. I'd like to have you back just to do some New Testament stuff with you. And, we can keep bouncing around. I love this stuff. And just to tease you, I know look, this, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, you're watching what was supposed to be just kind of hangout talk. Okay. This turned into this. This is an amazing conversation. I've been watching the show Rome again. I don't know if you ever watched the HBO.
Yeah, the HBO series. Wow.
I love
it was outstanding.
That. It's a complete rendition, right, of imaginating, and it's totally fictional in many ways, but there's a lot of real historical moments that get mentioned. And I am so mad I found out that they stopped the series. They were going to do several more series to do Game of Thrones. Now, I love Game of Thrones too, but why are they not doing the continuation? I want the life of Augustus. I really would like the entire... I would love for them to roll this whole thing out and have experts.
Well, I read somewhere that the set burned down. Not that they burned it down, but that it burned down somehow. So that's what I read. I could be wrong about that, but that's what I read somewhere. And
that was so good.
Yeah, it was such an amazing show, and what they put into the set, right, to create this whole city. It must have been extraordinary cost and labor. So if it did burn down, you could understand why they just had to say, sorry, we're done.
Unless the funding was worth it, because I tell you, I wish there were more enthusiasts, because I'd like to see them roll out the way they had Octavian grow up and be. He took on a personality in the show in a way that Mark Antony, they did just so good with the whole thing.
They did those things extremely well to give you, because when you're just reading the history, right, and you read about Octavian and Mark Antony, you don't really see like the age difference and the difference in maturity, but they bring this out by having the guy, Octavian at the right age and Mark Antony, and then you can just immediately see it. Okay. Like he's like, boy, right?
Yeah.
You boy, you do this. They're on a totally different level, right?
It is.
So it's magnificent at doing that. Yeah.
Even when he was going to fight Pompey and it looked like he was going to lose because he was outnumbered, and Mark Antony is back in Rome, of course, and he's sleeping with that one lady, and she pretty much is trying to bribe him into like, nah, forget him, just stay here. You see that Mark Antony, they played him like he was like a friend, but about his own interest too, and like they did a good job where he finally snaps, right? They did a moment. Now that's fiction. We don't have any history that shows us that's what happened, but the way he changes his mind and goes, you know what? No, I'm actually going to go help my friend, because she kind of pushed him over the edge in bed with him and want to marry her. I love little fictional renditions like that play into things that we have history of, and it just is unfortunate because I would love to see Augustus's life, the 41 years he reigns. Oh yeah,
it would be. There's something waiting to be done, but I guess it would be an enormous challenge, right, to get all the nuances of such a complicated guy for whom we have quite a bit of evidence, right? So you'd go crazy trying to fit all this stuff in a way.
I'd love that. Like take the lives of the Caesars and play a little bit into his birth, go back, if you could, and have the lightning strike the wall and the Gittae coming after. Like just to give a little bit, like one of the seasons starts out and there's this guy and his mother enters the temple and the serpent slithers up to her and like all the cool mythology on top. Oh man, I love it.
I agree with you. They did a fantastic job with it. Yeah.
Anyway, I love you, man. I really do. I hope everybody gets your books. Drop a comment of some positivity because Steve is an amazing scholar. And is there any final words from you on what we've said? Do you want to put a ribbon on it? And
I just mostly hope I haven't bored everybody to death. But the last thing to say is that history is the most fun you can have legally. It's really, I think that the reason I keep talking, Derek, about historical method is that I actually think we get somewhere with history and that it can solve many of the world's problems. We're in our tribal groups and we all believe stuff that, we heard, our traditions, our families, our groups tell us. But when we can actually do history together, meaning open-ended investigation of a problem, looking at all the evidence, talking, what's the best explanation? What do you think? I see a problem there. So this is the value of Tom's book for me, is that I don't have to agree or disagree with him. The point is he's laid down a marker, and it forces thoughtful people to say, wait a minute, why do I think the way I think? And I disagree with him. But this is not a criticism of Tom. This is an embrace and say, this is what scholarship's all about. Not having the last word, the right word, that then you say, this guy's an idiot, he's all... No. You say, thank you, Tom, for making a clear case about your assumptions, your methods, how you're reaching these conclusions. That forces me to clarify why I disagree with you. And now we move on. And I come back to you and say, what about this? What about that? And then we move on. That's what history is about. So that's why I can welcome his book, even though I completely disagree with it.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for taking your time to watch this far. Steve, I'd like to get into all that New Testament stuff and even the question of, could it be that other gospels know Josephus? That's a different question, different time. Love to tackle some of the things. Yeah, thank you so much for your time. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, never forget, we are MythVision.